It gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Tatiana Chemi. She is Associate Professor at Aalborg University in Denmark, and she's also where she is Chair of Educational Innovation. Tatiana is Chair where she is Associate Professor at Aalborg University, where she's Chair of Educational Innovation. And she works in the field of artistic learning and creative processes. She's author of Art-Based Approaches, a practical handbook to creativity at work, which was published in 2006. And In the Beginning Was the Pun, Comedy and Humour in Samuel Beckett's Theatre, which was published in 2013, as well as another monograph, The Arts of Arts Integration, published in 2014. And she is also the co-author of Behind the Scenes of Artistic Creativity, which was published in 2015. And it's worth also noting that in 2013, Aalborg University Press named her Author of the Year. And she is also involved in a project that Jana and Adam are involved in you'll be able to is it called interdisciplinarity in the arts? So the title of her paper is Theatre Laboratory as Post-Laboratory in Non-Artistic Contexts. So over to you.
Thank you. First of all, apologies for not being there in person. I really look forward to meeting you and visit Birmingham, not only for the curry, but also the Peaky Blinders. No, but no, to meet you guys. But yeah, it's so good to have these alternatives. It's not the same, as we know from performing arts. It's not the same as being in the same room together. But let's take this good opportunity for meeting and sharing. I will share something that is not really a final paper, but it's more a presentation of work. And I will present my area of research and some work I have done. And I will tell you more about where I am at this moment and in which way this knowledge informs my current projects. And it would be really nice to have some discussion, ideas, resonance, anything. And yes, as you've heard, I will share some slides that you can have afterwards if you think that it's relevant. And it's mostly for keeping track of what I'm talking about. So here it is. So as Graham said, my field of work is basically creativity and specifically the artist's creativity. Creativity in education, in the arts, with a special look at performing arts. And I look at theatre laboratory, which I'd like to share with you more about. At the moment, I'm based in Manchester, where I collaborate with the Philip Barker Centre for Creative Learning, which is a centre affiliated to the University of Chester. And I will tell you a little bit more about my research with the University of Chester in a while. I will share with you some few open access contributions. For instance, the book Behind the Scenes of Artistic Creativity, where empirical work on artists from different artistic expressions are collected. It's now open access online, and some other books that could be interesting. So first of all, why theatre laboratory and what is a theatre laboratory? I was compelled to investigate these because the practice of theatre laboratory is very much present in the performing art tradition I've been socialized into and trained within. And it is not clear what theatre laboratory is. So my idea was to investigate historical knowledge, secondhand, of course, historical knowledge about where does this tradition come from, and then apply some new empirical knowledge with living masters. I use these words, this vocabulary, because it comes from the empirical data. Masters and pupils, what are they telling about their own practices and experiences of theatre laboratory? So the book, A Theatre Laboratory, approach to pedagogy and creativity, was looking at audience theatre and the group learning perspective in between the actors that are also involved in pedagogical tasks and their pupils. Long story short, my insights on theatre laboratory can be summed up into these categories. And if I should define a theatre laboratory, which Mirella Schino believes it's impossible to define, because the practices around theatre laboratories are so different and so multiple that it's impossible to give one definition. But my understanding of theatre laboratory is that is characterized by the following: a place that we share, a group, so it's several people together, common values, shared values, and a specific way, a specific methodology, which is a research methodology and pedagogy. I will say more about these points, and of course each one of them is directly informing my current research. First of all, a place. Here you can see this is the outside garden of Odin Theatre. If you're familiar with the story, you know that they moved from Norway, where they were making theatre as very young people in very poor physical frames, like a former bunker and schools, and they didn't have their own place to train and develop their artistic ideology, artistic purposes. And in 1966, they were offered a dismantled farm in Denmark, in the countryside of Denmark. And they moved in 66, and they built literally stone by stone this place. So a shared space is informing in probably in multiple entanglements of influences the work within the space, and the work within the space is informing the space itself, which is transforming together with the actors in this laboratory conversation between human and non-human. In my research, I investigated the interaction, or one could say interaction in Baradian terms, between human, non-human, the actors and the space around them. And I was wondering if there were a sort of communities of practice, as the learning theory can frame. And actually, I concluded that this is more like a community of practices, a singular community, a singular ensemble of people coming together, who come together from different practices that can recognize each other as coming from a shared genealogy. And the genealogical idea could be also going back to Foucault, but the way I use it, it's very much informed by feminist new materialist theories, Haraway and Barat. When actors were asked, I did semi-structured qualitative interviews, and when professional actors were asked to talk about learning, about their own learning, what I found out is that what they're actually saying is that learning is organic, which is very much consistent to specific constructivist, social constructivist learning theories. But they understand it not theoretically, but in practice, in their bodies and in their practices on the floor. Learning is organic. And an interesting surprise was that these actors were using the terms learning and work invariably as synonyms. You know, you do learning, you do some learning projects, but it's work, and when you learn, you work. And they use it as full synonyms, and I will tell you more about in a while why so. And then learning is reciprocal or shared. And this when I mention professional actors, I mention the masters, again in brackets, because this is the language that is used in the Odin theater laboratorial tradition. When I asked the pupils replied that this is not a school, actually. This is not a school. This is not this. There is no start, development, and end. There is no official paper that tells you now you know a number of skills. Now you master a number of skills. But learning is a continuum, and it will be a lifelong enterprise. This is not a school. It doesn't start and end. Art is a temple. We are servant to a shared passion. And I use this word also in an erotic way, understanding erotic as the eros and the desire, always unfulfilled desire for achieving one's own passion. And then what they said, el trabajo es del maestro, the work is the master. The master is the work itself. We learn from the work. And this is where the shared dimension in between the masters and pupils is emerging. Odin theater actors, they train and they follow pedagogical one-to-one or one with smaller groups, pedagogical projects. All pedagogical projects are also artistic work projects. And what Odin theater actors are replying to young actors who are really willing to have them as masters is, of course, no, as an answer. They are very busy actors. They travel most of their time. They tour with their artistic projects, their conferences, special projects, cultural publishing projects, community political projects, all sort of activities. So they're very busy. There are many young actors who would like to be trained and follow the work. So the first answer will be always no. So what does the pupil who still feels compelled to achieve this desire of learning? Well, the pupil probably will follow the group again and again in their public seminars or courses. And when the pupil is compelled in designing an artistic project, the first core of the artistic project, when this is brought into the table of the master, then what the master says is there is the start, the core of a work initiating, and this is obliging the master to follow this work, and which becomes a shared project. This doesn't mean that the actors of the Odin Theatre's actors who are masters in pedagogical projects are signing with their name the directing or co-creation of projects, but very often this is exactly the case. So something shared happens, and they both learn from each other through a third collaborative phenomenon, which is the work itself. What does the work need from us? So there are several consequences of, and these are some of the findings that I mentioned for you, but there are some direct consequences that I also investigated in my book, and which ended up being a sort of trampoline into my research at the moment. So the place, we have a shared place, which is not necessarily a building, because in post-dramatic, the actors' theatre, physical theatre, and in several acting traditions, the actors is bringing his, her own room, place, shaping the frames with his, her own body. And this goes back to folk theatre, commedia dell'arte, shaping the theatre in urban frames. So the place could be the room for the experiments in the laboratory, but it's also post-laboratory. Here I was inspired by some research made in the visual arts, which is framing the artistic studio as a post studio, and of course contemporary artistic practices, which are more and more laboratorial, collaborative, and are moving outside the artist, the closed artist studio. When I investigated this similarity, I actually learned that the visual artist studio, has never been a closed studio, the place of study, only of study, separated with the place that is displaying work. Going back to the Renaissance, for instance, visual artists were working in an ensuite space where the studio, always a desk, was the place of study, but the bottega, the shop, was the space where artistic works in progress, even the ones in progress, were on display. In the same way, I can see that the theatre laboratory has been opening up to the post-laboratory space by bringing its experiments with communities, for instance, using methodologies as barters, bringing it outside frames made of bricks and walls. And this is expanding the frames of what the actors' bodies can do and can communicate. The group dimension for me opened up to a new way of thinking both performing arts production but also pedagogy. And I've been looking at it as a sort of kinship, so sort of a family with shared genealogies. Where do you come from? This is a question that's within artists, within actors, has a very specific subtle understanding. Who are your masters? Where do you come from? Who is your artistic family? So I've been looking at it as through the lenses of Haraway's concept of kinship and Foucault's concept of genealogy. I also look at the affects side of this relationality as radical hospitality and radical generosity of Patrick Campbell and Jane Turner. And actually, I relate very much to Jane and Patrick's work on third theatre. Even though they were looking at third theatre as a phenomenon, and third theatre is what in theatre anthropology is defined as not as mainstream and not as alternative theatre, but something in between. And they made very serious, thorough work by following some of the most long-standing third theatre groups. And it's interesting that their research ends up concluding more or less the same as mine, also because the third theatre groups very often use the methodology of theatre laboratory. So the shared values, the common values, is often the ability of take care of and being taken care of, this radical generosity. What I am developing, taking from here conceptually, is the concept of ensemble creativity. It's creativity that is group-based, team-based, distributed, but also based on the ensemble togetherness. I will come back to this concept. Concerning the common values, there is a sure focus on community work, democratic values, that and the application of agency and activist work. And I try to investigate these as poetic communities and poetic encounters. So communities that communicate through poiesis and have the purpose of shaping metaphors and storytelling together. Research. As I said, this was one of my findings, which director of and leader of Odin Theatre, Eugenio Barba, has been quite critical about. While I was writing my book, of course, I involved him in some validation of my research interpretations. And he's been has been opposing very much to this category of research. And which story that I'm telling in the book. And his reason was that we are artists, and Odin Theatre started as an artistic group, ensemble. Our purpose was not to make research. Our purpose was to make art, to make performances, develop the performances. So what I wanted was not to make research, but to make performances. I still challenge this understanding in my book as framing in this way, that Barba's desire was not to just make theater, but to investigate the possibilities of some specific dramaturgical structures that he had learned in Poland at Grotowski's company. And he wanted to investigate this way of expressing through performative and dramaturgical structures. And I call this research. And it is an embodied research. I mention here a couple of third theater initiatives that could be interesting for you to check: cross-pollination and the Parliament of Practices. Both initiatives are focused on doing research in collaboration with universities or just artistic research and reframing research as embodied. What can bodies do that we don't know they can do? Recently, at the end of August, Eugenio Barba concluded that I'm not so opposed to the concept of research as an element of theatre laboratory anymore, because what I can see is that theatre laboratory intends to rethink the systems of dramaturgical expression. And this is something that we are investigating at the moment. And the last point, pedagogy. Theatre laboratory always starts as a practice already from its very start as pedagogical. For the Odin Theatre example, that was a necessity because they were young people. They had no training. They had no money. They couldn't afford to go to expensive drama schools. So what they did was to teach each other. So their theatre laboratorial example or practice has been pedagogical from the very start. And what kind of pedagogy is, of course, an embodied pedagogy. It's a pedagogy where affects have a place to be acknowledged as knowledge producing, and where creativity is critical because of the activism of its agency, and ethical dilemmas are addressed. My obsession and my purpose was also to learn from theatre laboratory, as it is to learn from artists, from professional artists. So what can we learn from theatre laboratory? What can we learn from these kind of practices? And let me check the time if we can do this experiment. I think we can do it. So this is an experiment just to show you how I frame these for my students. I am affiliated at the Department of Culture and Education. And my students are not artists. My students are educators, can be nurses, they're coaches, they're leaders, and they learn through artistic practices and artistic principles. So one example is the principle of opposition, which I bring to them as a core principle for creativity. So if you have a piece of paper around you, if you have a piece of paper, and if you're willing to have your video on, or just not, just, you know, if you make a paper ball, if you try to make a paper ball, and when you're ready, you just feel your body, and when you're ready, you just throw it, and just notice what happens. Just throw your ball. Yeah. And what happened? Do you notice what happened? Anyone wants to share? Anything?
I tended to really bunch it into a fist and throw it. So the pressure, I increased the pressure as I threw it.
Anyone else? Let me check. Anyone else? Did you notice what happens in your body when you throw it?
I think there was a release of energy.
Release of energy?
Yeah, that's also what I wanted to say, like tension and release, a double play.
Yeah. Yes. At this point in my class, I ask my students to make another paper ball or collect, and we try again. We try again, you know, and I show them how the body is moving. You know, no one did this, right? I didn't see anyone of you doing this. But what you do when you have to send energy, as Persephone says, release the energy in this direction, you start from here. You start in the opposite direction. And you push all your energy. These in very few words, and in this little embodied experience, which I also tried to do online with my students in the lockdown situation. But this is a very embodied experience that they can bring and bridge to theoretical framing. Because then I can tell them that often in creativity, the energy sent in towards a specific purpose starts from the opposite. That's why creative learning processes are not linear. And that's why we in theater, theater anthropology, we look at similar principles in different acting traditions, and we can see that one of the principles, others are energy and so forth, but one is the principle of position, where the performers develops resistance by creating oppositions. And this is also what we do in creative projects. If there are no rules, we create the rules in order to create this tension, the resistance, because it increases the density of each movement, the bodily movement, but also the movement of our minds and brains and projects. This is one of the examples that I can bring. How can we use the pedagogical knowledge into very concrete pedagogical conversations? And this comes from theater anthropology, which you might know. It's the study of common principles in different performing traditions. I will not get into the theater anthropology debates about cultural appropriation and everything, because it's a real and deep problematic, and it will take too much of our time. And this is not the focus of this talk, because when we transpose what we learn from the arts, artistic processes into pedagogy, we work with Stanislavski's magic if. What if? We're still asking this artistic, imaginative question. What if we bring the knowledge of and practices from theater laboratory into higher education? This was my question. What if? This is not necessarily feasible. This is not necessarily ethical. This is not necessarily applicable. But what is applicable, interesting, feasible, and important is to ask the questions and to make these two worlds collide, the basic of interdisciplinarity or transdisciplinarity, asking the imaginative, what if we put them together? Then we become clear about our values, for instance, and our ethical considerations. For instance, at the universities, formal institutions that we're working at, we can't exclude students. We can't say, no, I'm too busy. But when a student develops a piece of scholarly work, then this might become the core of a doctoral study. And we know that doctoral studies become very often a shared work from the senior and junior staff. So poetic communities and poetic encounters could be communities that gather through and by means of shared poetic experiences. What is the poetic project that brings us together. It is a set of performative principles through which embodied encounters happen, but they are not, even though they are not unique, there are sustained practices that are uniquely performed by and through the arts. So they're not unique, but they're uniquely performed in practice through the arts. And when I talk about theater and theatrical experiences, I frame them as the shaping of stories into sensory forms repeatedly together. And the shaping of stories in dramaturgical structures through sensory and bodily forms, the aesthetic bodily expression repeatedly. This is the performativity part. And the ensemble, the togetherness that is not only embracing the members of the troupe, the theater group, but also the communities they relate to and with. And I will not spend too much time on the performativity, but I just pasted here the conceptualization I'm working with as performance, as a repetition of construction and deconstruction, the per shaping form repeatedly. So what I'm working at is exactly how do we bring all this knowledge together? How do we bring theater, understood as the dramaturgy of aesthetic forms in performativity, in a togetherness of these poetic communities? How do we bring them into non-artistic contexts? Is it possible? Is it possible to extend the theater laboratory into this post-laboratory where we make art, we perform together with non-artists? And this is what I'm working at the moment, currently at Chester University. That I have at the moment, two strands of my research. The one is art as activism that I'm investigating with my doctoral students. One is looking at community building through music. Another one is looking at the citizen as is artist. He's also a musician. And the third one, she's looking at clay making, so the touch and healing. We are actually looking at an alternative epistemology, the epistemology of the body, and of course a different ontology where human, non-human, the materiality and the human is working together in these intra-active entanglements. And the other strand is the theater in higher education. And the cases I look at is education in pedagogy, in leadership, in military training, and recently with Chester University, theater as simulation in nurse and midwifery training. So this is some of the work I've been doing with the artist-led learning in higher education project. It has been a Erasmus Plus funded project for 3 years. And each one of these booklets, they are for free online. And actually, I had a copy for you guys. I will send. I had a physical copy, but the online versions are as beautiful as the paper copy. And each one of these booklets contains 2 extended chapters looking at different cases of the application of the arts in higher education. Many of these cases rely on performing arts and theater. So let me stop share. I would be happy to share some more, depending on what you are more curious about. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. There's some all sorts of interesting things that you've raised in that talk. I wonder if anyone else would like to comment or ask Tatiana a question on her work on theatre workshops. One question I had was, I mean, what element do you feel, I suppose risk is the wrong word, but are there sort of elements of risk in some of the work that you do?
Do you think specific risks, like
with the young people? I don't have any sort of specific elements in mind, but experiences that you've had in workshop conditions where problematic things that you might not have even foreseen have occurred.
Okay. Yes, because there are many risks at all levels when we do artistic work. It's as if we have a contract, a clear contract. You know, we step into a museum, a theater room, even if it's an happening or a street theater. You know, it's the breaking of a specific relational contract that we have with each other. I might bump into a busker playing music. You know, it's an alternative kind of contract that, you know, all sort of futurist data has helped breaking. Yeah. But it's still a sort of reciprocal understanding. When we bring artistic practices in non-artistic education, then there we encounter a number of rejections at several levels. Micro level, participants, the nurses, you know, I want to become a nurse. Why should I do theater training? So, and this implies that we need to sharpen up the research. Why are we doing that? What is the pedagogical output? The gain? What is the ontology? How do we see people? How do we see learning? How do we understand learning as reciprocal, as dialogical, as embodied? All ideologies that haven't been influencing formal education, formal higher education enough. And I come from a university that is problem-based learning based. All through university, Aalborg University is problem-based. Our students, starting from first year of bachelor, they are small researchers, and they work with their own questions, with their own interest. So this is the first level of risk. The second level of risk is for us educators. How do we design education that is engaging, is embracing embodiment, the poetic affects, and it's reciprocal, not because the teacher, the educator, is at the same level as the student, as Frere was saying. You know, we are still experts in our topic, but what kind of relationships do we want to establish in our classroom? So it brings these dilemmas also. Can I allow myself to say no to a student? We can't. It brings the dilemma, but the fact that theatre laboratory actors, the masters, they say no to a student as long as the student is not committing to a very concrete piece of work. That becomes the shared work. And then political level, there is a huge risk in framing learning in this way, learning and education. And at the moment speaking, I try to, well, this is recorded, so probably I shouldn't say that, but I try to keep low key, because in Denmark there is a proposal for a reform, one more reform of higher education, and the proposal is to bring humanistic courses, humanistic candidates to 1 year, from 2 years to 1 year, and to spread all the educational institutions all over the country in this misunderstood purpose of taking it from the big centers, Copenhagen, Aarhus, Aalborg, the big towns, where students are coming because there are also a number of informal learning opportunities, like theaters, museums, and life in streets. So this reform is going to be a disaster if it goes through. And we have a very good educational system in Denmark. You know, Danish students they're paid for studying. Not much. It's just, you know, just few pocket money, but it's a help to encourage them also finding a study job and living on their own, and feeling also committed to the fact that their study is their job, you know. So this reform is going to be a disaster. And where are we placed from the artistic, humanistic subjects? We are at the moment, I mentioned to Jana, because we're working on interdisciplinarity. Just yesterday, we had a conversation on a new project on problem-based learning and interdisciplinarity in the STEM. And I keep reminding my colleagues and leaders of the STEAM instead. You know, the STEM, sciences, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The core was important, yeah. And the STEAM, it's with the arts, right in the middle. It's much more sensory, the STEAM instead of the STEM. And we must. It's not enough. It's not enough to have interdisciplinarity within very consistent discipline groups, but it's important to mix and match with very different disciplines. For instance, I'm learning from literature about nurse simulation training that in this field, collaborations between nurses and doctors or nurses and physiotherapists is considered as interdisciplinary, which is okay because it's two different disciplines, but it's still within the health. What happens when actors are collaborating with nurses? And this is under-described. What happens when actors collaborate with military leaders at the leadership education? So are we truly navigating political policies and political discourses? And this is so risks and dilemmas are at micro, meso, and micro. Yeah, the 3 levels.
Thanks very much. Does anyone have another question for Tatiana? For us at Birmingham, the excitement never stops for us. We have a staff meeting coming up soon, so I think this will probably be the last question, which will be unfortunate, but I'm sure people will be able to email you, Tatiana.
Definitely. Also, if you want to share, if there is anything that you want to share from your experiences, that would be very helpful for me. I think Persephone.
Yes, well, yes, thank you so much. I really enjoyed your presentation, Tatiana, and thank you, Graham, for organizing it. It's not a question, really. It's just I want to say that I relate to a lot of the things that you said, because I can see how organic and reciprocal and shared learning can take place in community theatre, applied theatre, outside the black box, in places where we go to find those who need us most. And I was particularly interested about something you said about the interaction between actors and their pupils in the space, and their relationship in interaction with the space around them. Mostly because my research is about performing for children and young people in hospitals and hospices, where that confined space that is dominated by messages of illness and pain, you know, the space and the awareness of the space, creating the fictional within reality, maintaining it as much as possible. So there is an ongoing conversation. I just wanted to thank you, because while you were talking, I was thinking, oh, yes, that makes sense. And yes, we can discuss about this later. There are so many synergies between performing and pedagogy, and I think health. Gianna is also very much aware, and you know, in this environment. So about interdisciplinarity, I have hopes that despite the difficulty of interdisciplinarity, different languages, different cultures, different priorities, different tasks and targets, different environments, we can still learn from each other. And very quickly, if you could, I would like to see if I'm all alone in this, or there are others who also feel optimistic about it, and how we can work together to progress. That was longer than I was aiming to.
And if I can say, I posted in the chat the reference to the action. It's from Karen Barad, Meeting the Universe Halfway. It's a very compelling reading, and I'm curious about the same. So if anyone.
Thank you very much. As I say, thanks everyone for coming along, and I shall be sending out details for our next research seminar, which will be taking place, I think, towards the end of November. And so do keep an eye out on, well, it's now Drama HE, but it used to be Scud, so I'll be sending things out there. thanks again, everybody, for coming.
Thank you so much. And I hope next time we will have curry together.
Well, yes,
I haven't forgotten.
The dip shad awaits you in Selly Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much, Tatiana.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.